Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us. We're glad that you are here for this really important conversation around investing in technologies for adaptation and resilience in Asia. My name is Brian Parham. I'm with the Lightsmith Group. I'm a program manager of the Adaptation SME Accelerator program, and we're delighted to co-host this event with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. A few housekeeping notes that I will make, and then we'll get kicked off into the conversation. As you can see here, the session agenda is here. We'll have some welcoming and opening remarks from Quan Zhang, followed by a panel on investing in early stage adaptation technologies led by Julia. And then Jay Ko from the Lightsmith Group will lead a panel on climate adaptation and resilience solutions. For those who want to ask questions, there's a Q&A in the Zoom feature where you can submit questions where the panelists can respond in chat or in their answers during Q&A during the panel. And then we will close with closing remarks. And without further ado, I will invite Director General Quan Zhang to give some opening remarks to set the context for today. Thank you.
Very much, Brian, and good morning to everyone. And thank you very much for joining this exciting webinar on financing adaptation technologies in Asia. The topic of technologies and adaptation is indeed a very important topic, and AIB is very pleased to co-host it together with our partner, Lightsmith Group and the SME Accelerator program. Climate change is posing pervasive risks to infrastructure. As a result of a combination of factors, including a lack of data-driven, evidence-based asset planning, design, and management, infrastructure is vulnerable to climate change, and extreme weather events that are occurring more often than before calls for resilience being part of infrastructure projects considerations and receives the necessary financing. If we do not address resilience of infrastructure, we are investing into assets against the future of climate that is no longer the same as today. Building infrastructure that cannot withstand future shocks would potentially bring more devastating losses. In 2020 alone, overall disaster-related loss in Asia amounted to $67 billion US, and it is estimated that the growth in average annual disaster losses will soon outpace GDP growth in the region if we do not address resilience today and now. Emerging technologies can play a major role in enhancing the climate resilience of critical infrastructure. Fully recognizing the importance and urgency to act, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, we AIB, and as a multilateral development bank focusing on infrastructure for tomorrow, has been actively engaged in supporting the development, scaling up, and the deployment of emerging technologies for climate resilience infrastructure. As an infrastructure financier that considers the entire value chain, including relevant technologies, AIB has been actively seeking opportunities to invest in climate resilience solutions. As you all know that AIB has corporate strategy. Our corporate strategy commits AIB to be fully Paris aligned for all of its investment operations from 1st of July this year. And also we have committed to achieve at least 50% of climate financing over its annual financing by 2025. Climate adaptation, of course, is a very key part of our AIB's climate ambition and commitment. As with other technologies, climate resilience infrastructure solutions do not just emerge overnight. They take time, ingenuity, and finance. With devastating climate change impact already inflicting considerable damages, we cannot afford to wait. We must invest now and at scale in technological solutions to help us build infrastructure for tomorrow. Today, you will hear about some of our initiatives and learn more about the different funds as well as companies offering innovative solutions which promoting adaptation. I hope you will join this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And so now we will go into our first panel. Let me introduce Julia Polycarp from AIB, who will be moderating the first panel on investing in early stage adaptation technologies. Julia, take it away.
Thanks so much, Brian. Thanks, and hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. So those who have joined, let me quickly go through this second panel. We have three distinguished panelists. One, unfortunately, is still trying to join. So perhaps we will start with the two panelists speaking, and then we hope that we will sort out the technical difficulties, and the third panelist will still be able to join and speak to this event. So the first panel is on investing in early stage adaptation technologies, and I'm very pleased to present the two panelists that we have today. Let me just quickly share my screen, and you will see the speakers here. So we have Kishlaya Misha, who is the Senior Investment Officer in the Private Equity and Banking team in the AIB. He has over 15 years of experience in investments in private equity and venture capital, and he is currently the team lead in a number of projects that the AIB is financing. He is joined by Helen Wong, who is our managing partner. And so our managing partner in AC Ventures, and she is a very prominent venture capitalist investor. She's been ranked as top 25 venture capitalist by Forbes magazine, and she will be presenting her work as the AC Venture Capital's managing partner. And the third panelist is Vikram Dilipan. He's a principal at the Lock Capital Investment Fund, and he unfortunately is still trying to join. So I hope that he will be able to do so, and he will present himself when he joins the panel here. So maybe with the further overdue, I would like to ask the panelists to present what they're doing, but just to set up a little bit of a context, I'm also very keen to hear their views as to why adaptation technologies are not yet readily and widely available, as, for example, is with the mitigation technologies such as solar and wind. And what is your organization doing, any incentives and structures it is suggesting now so that there are more investments flowing into adaptation technology? So perhaps maybe I'll pass it on to Kishlaya to present on what AIB is doing in this regard, and then I will ask Helen Wong to also speak to their work. Kishlaya, over to you.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you for giving this opportunity. Thanks to Lightsmith Group for bringing us all together under one roof to discuss.
Kishlaya, we cannot hear you.
Hi, everyone. This is Vikram.
Kishlaya?
Kishlaya, I think your microphone's not working. Your headphones seem to be broken. I don't think he can hear either.
Kishlaya, we cannot hear you.
I think if he unplugs his headphones. No.
Julia, do you want me to go first?
Yes, I think so. Maybe Kishlaya,
Okay.
Kishlaya will ask Helen to speak first, and maybe you can figure out your microphone. And I think we have Vikram here as well, who has joined the panel. So I'll wait.
Okay.
I'll wait. Helen, please go.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Juliet. So very happy to be here. I'm Helen Wong from AC Ventures. We are an early stage venture capital firm based in Indonesia. And we have been looking at sustainability investments for quite some time and made some investments in this area. And I think to answer partly your question, Julia, is I was a venture capitalist for many years in China. and I saw the growth of the solar industry in China. I think that was really a lot of government funding and also venture capital funding that went into the sector and really helped to lower the cost of solar and made it now today very affordable. But unfortunately, for a lot of other technologies, there need to be a lot more government support as well as venture capital support to make them cost effective. But we do see that there's a lot of opportunities, and everybody, at least today, is aware of the climate risk and willing to support the whole green technology revolution. So just a bit of a brief introduction on AC Ventures. We are a venture capital firm based in Southeast Asia with a core focus on Indonesia. And this is just a brief introduction about our fund. We do make sure that we meet the 12 UN SDG goals. And also we have about 40% female occupancy in leadership roles in portfolio companies. I'd like to just maybe give a quick overview on Southeast Asia. We believe that Southeast Asia is uniquely positioned to expand the green economy, given that 20% of the world's biodiversity is located here, and also 10% of the world's population is actually being affected. If you look across the different countries, many of them have already set their net zero targets. And in particular, in Indonesia, we've been piloting carbon trading, and the policies have been pretty conducive. Although this is only a recent development, in the past, there was actually a moratorium on carbon credit export, which led to some uncertainty, which also affects venture capital investment in this sector. These are some of our portfolio companies that we have seen made positive environmental contributions. So, for example, we've invested in sustainable energy, Surya, which does solar panels, as well as Lot 9, which is on the fuel cells, as well as on the mobility side, including electric vehicles, and also sustainable agriculture, and as well as waste management and circularity. With regard to where areas that we think are interesting in this part of the world, we unfortunately do not see a lot of deep tech companies, startups in this part of the world. I think you see more of that in the US and Europe, but we do see opportunities such as on the nature-based solutions to protect the forest, as well as on the sustainable farming side in areas like regenerative agriculture, and also traceability of supply chains. And then also, as I mentioned, in electric vehicle and waste management. Specifically with regard to adaptation, I just like to highlight some of the companies that we are investing in. So one, for example, is this is with regard to helping trace supply chains across, for the agricultural sector. And this company, they have the advantage in that multinationals are willing to pay more for the crops of these farmers in Indonesia. But I think that in general, the farmers are also weighing, what is the opportunity cost? For example, they could, maybe make more money through palm oil. But we are helping them to basically realize that, there is different ways that they can increase their revenues. For example, if they're planting coffee, they can also plant some fruit trees. And this not only, helps to improve the yield for them, and also because of the soil quality, as well as, we can also help them with inputs to have more drought-resistant crops growing on their farms. Because as you all know, climate change is causing sometimes very unpredictable weather patterns. And so drought is sometimes a big issue for them. Yeah, so this is an area that we think, venture capital can help. And we also hope that, there is more developmental finance, for example, financing for the farmers to buy the inputs. Yeah. This is a company that is focused on nature-based solutions. And I think while there is some controversy over how these projects are being measured, on the whole, we do believe that nature-based solutions are still a big contributor, not just to the mitigation, but also to the adaptation, because it actually prevents flooding, for example, and helps to have the forest protect in terms of biodiversity and also in terms of the prevention of floods. And so we believe that this is also a sector that is, worthwhile to invest in. But again, we need more government support, because we do see that there has been some changes in policies, as well as some concerns on the part of corporates to buy these credits. So we do hope that we can help use technology such as digital MRV to help to make sure that these projects are trustworthy. So maybe I'll stop there and leave it up to discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen. Very interesting indeed, and particularly thank you for presenting 2 specific case studies. And we can surely see that there is an appetite for adaptation investments, and those are very interesting indeed, particularly with regards to nature-based solutions, as we do see now the interest in picking up of the different investors to consider nature-based solutions, biodiversity conservation, etc. So very interesting indeed. And now I'll perhaps pass on back to Kishlaya from AIB, because I believe that he has fixed his microphone. Kishlaya,
can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, great. Sorry for that. I think the moment we talk about technology, it makes us realize it's important. So coming back about the role AIB is playing, I'll just amplify the message from our DG Con, talking about the larger commitments AIB has made in the climate space, which we from the investment team are trying to pursue. I think a couple of points which comes when we consider climate adaptation and investment, which are sort of a cause of something which we can work together. Helen already mentioned about the enabling government regulations and policies to see adaptation per se separately than mitigation, because generally it comes under one umbrella, and the context required for adaptation has to be clearly laid out for adaptation to make its own marks. But from an investment side, I think we see 4 things which are challenging. Number 1 is adaptation technologies are not set up much in only urban settings. These are semi-urban rural settings, and that is where the digital divide comes into picture of how these technologies are being used, and the context of digital divide has to be seen. And this is something which is to be, if the lesser the digital divide, the more these technologies are acceptable, and hence more adaptation measures. The second important thing is these technologies are set up where monetization of these technologies, even from a venture side, Helen and Vikram will talk about, it has to make a commercial sense for returns to come through. The monetization of these technologies is challenging, because these are in, again, the setting is very different than an urban setting where people take time to understand technology. You have to make them realize about the cost versus the total cost of ownership concept of what this technology is bringing it to them. So the real second challenge of adaptation technology is monetization. The third thing which we think we see, and I think Helen and Vikram will agree with me, is reliability aspects. Because there are climate related aspects, because there are technology aspects, the reliability of these technologies per se, say for a data per se, or a precision agriculture or something, people have to see the data to believe in the technology. So it's like a chicken and egg situation, where people get that comfort, yes, that this is making some difference. So the third important point which we all have to work is to ensure that we have the reliability of these technologies ascertained by the end users themselves. And fourth and last point which I would like to bring to your notice, that these markets are very fragmented, and hence the challenge of scalability also comes in. So while the technology may be good, may be very contextual, but that context changes, say if it's in some other setting. And hence the challenges for adaptation technology is the fragmented nature and the scalability associated with it. So I'll see that I'll talk about that these 4 pointers from the technology investment side I see challenging. To your question, Julia, on AIB side. So from AIB side, as I said, you and me, we both are working together on the VC program. Basically, just for all participants, AIB approved 130 million VC program last year. Basically, this VC program entails approval of 10 to 12 funds under the VC program, which are supporting the green infrastructure mandate and tech-enabled infrastructure mandate of the bank. So we are in the market looking for such opportunities, and will be selectively deploying our capital for the VC fund managers who are working with a certain mandate, so that we at our end can also do our bit to support these innovative technologies in the climate, and exclusively in climate adaptation per se. And the last pointer which I wanted to mention is that before VC program itself, we started talking about these technologies almost 3 years back when we established the Infratech platform. So the Infratech platform is complementary to the VC program, and we first started it almost 3 years back, where we started talking about what these technologies are. Because as a developmental institution, not only investments and impacts, is also important to create an ecosystem. And this is where Infratech, through our strategy colleagues, is playing an enabler role by working on two important aspects of knowledge capacity and building, where bringing like-minded institutions and supporting and connecting with the value chain aspects of the climate. And the second important thing is interconnect, because we think platforms like us and through events like this can bring like-minded people together to further harness the potential of climate adaptation. With this, Julia, I'll take a pause and over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Kishla. Very interesting indeed. And I couldn't agree with you more on the challenges that you have highlighted, including the monetization, data availability, as well as the fragmentation of the market indeed. And I think if we speak perhaps on the adaptation technologies in the more developed markets versus the ones that we are as an AIB investing into, it is a very different story and a very different picture. So thank you very much for highlighting that, and also for speaking to some of the initiatives that we do here at the AIB for those participants who would like to hear more about that. Now, let me move on to our third and final speaker, who is Vikram Dilipan. Vikram, I believe you did not manage to join a little bit earlier, so we've skipped the introduction. If you could please introduce yourself, speak a little bit to your company, and maybe perhaps if you could also speak to some of the investment thesis or investment story around adaptation technologies. We would be also very keen to hear from you. Over to you, Vikram.
Thank you, Julia. I think there was some technical snafu at the beginning, but I'm glad it's resolved now. Much thanks for this opportunity to talk about climate resilience and adaptation in India, mostly from the perspective that it's very often a subject which is not addressed as much as climate mitigation efforts are. While we believe that a certain amount of capital has started to flow in, to be specific, more than 35–40% of annual capital flow has been now focused on climate and resilience and adaptation, but it still needs to be addressed with a heavier hand, I would say. Coming to a little bit of an introduction about what we do at Lok Capital. Lok has been an impact investor for almost a couple of decades now, started in the mid-2000s. We are currently on our fourth fund. Our focus has always been in impactful companies which are creating around the sectors of financial services, climate, health tech, and also around agri-tech. And as far as the fourth fund is concerned, we are trying to target 4 specific sectors that I mentioned. And within climate, which is also a vertical and an horizontal focus for us, we will be looking at mitigation, resilience, and adaptation focused ventures. Our thesis is to impact India from the perspective that one of the largest growing economies and likely poised to be the second or third largest GDP in the world very shortly. And from that perspective, we'll be looking at companies across value chains in renewable energy, e-mobility. We'll be looking at energy efficiency. We'll be very specifically looking at climate data, resilience, and adaptation platforms. We will also be looking at companies which are impacting consumers at a level which it has not been seen so far, from reducing greenhouse gases. And an interesting focus for us would also be across these other sectors of agriculture, healthcare, where we are coming in with the lens that how can we deploy our capital to impact these companies in these other sectors as well, to become more resilient and adaptive for future envisioned climate risks. And I've been in the climate space first as an entrepreneur, then as an investor for the past 1.5 decades. And I'm looking forward to share my views on how we are going to be doing this successfully in India with Lok's fourth fund. And we have already started deploying our capital. We have one of the recent investments that we have done, which very much speaks to our efforts around climate resilience and adaptation, is a platform called Aqua Connect. Aqua Connect is working with shrimp farmers to make the local shrimp and aquaculture ecosystem much more resilient by decarbonizing the scope 3 emissions. These are products that are exported to, let's say, the developed markets from India. And as it so happens, the local communities are working together with the platform to strengthen and decarbonize their infrastructure against climate threats. And this might be from finding out daily harvest to monthly harvest through satellite imagery and AI, and trying to figure out and address how we can foresee risks around climate mitigation and adaptation using this satellite imagery, and try and figure out a way to get ahead of these risks and implement measures to counteract these risks very actively. So we have been working very closely with Aqua Connect to deploy these technologies and impact local communities. I think as far as the challenges are concerned, very rightly pointed out by Kish, I would like to think of it in terms of a framework of 4 different points. One is climate resilience and adaptation so far has not been able to leverage concessional public capital and grant capital in a large sense of the word. And I think that would be essential for us to figure out how to move this forward. And international funds for adaptation have not been focused on continuous deployment and long-term sustainable deployment to impact these measures further. And that would be another area of focus for us to think about and ponder how we can impact that. And finally, the technological commercialization aspect is also very key, like what Kish pointed out, which goes on to say that there are nascent platforms such as Aqua Connect, which are coming out in the market. And these are impacting various different infrastructures, various different industries, and making them more resilient and adaptive. But at the same time, the commercial angle of it and how it really makes sense as an economic entity to be in the system, that is something that we are working closely with the ecosystem to make sure that they can act as proof of commercialization points, so we can scale these measures further to the larger economy itself, and therefore make the economy much more resilient and adaptive. Right? And 4th point would be, I would say, standardizing the procedures for adaptation planning and costing. I think what countries have not been successfully able to mainstream so far is how do you, in a very standardized format, prepare for vulnerability assessment, prepare for adaptation of these plans and cost structures for them to make sense across the economy. And I think these are 4 challenges that would need to be addressed for adaptation and resilience to go mainstream.
Thanks so much, Vikram, as well. Very good points and very interesting observations. And it's indeed encouraging to see that your company, particularly, for example, is really looking at the adaptation as a risk to your investments, as a risk to the profitability of the companies, and therefore you really see that there is a need to consider the countermeasures and therefore make those investments more resilient. And I think also another point you also very rightly raised, and so I think that others, is speaking around, both the benefits of adaptation and mitigation. So I think we oftentimes say, what are the adaptation technologies, what are the specific adaptation investments, but it's important to note that we have to consider mainstreaming them, and if we can do projects that address both mitigation and adaptation, have a benefits on mitigation and adaptation, then that would indeed make those investments much more attractive and I think much more interesting in the future. So thanks a lot for these specific considerations. Let me then pose another question to all of the panelists. You all spoke presented very interesting cases and provided examples of the investments that you're doing, and you also listed the challenges around investment in adaptation. I was wondering, perhaps, I think, Helen, you alluded to it a little bit, if you could say any specific incentives you think that should be provided either through larger investors, or I think some of you mentioned the potential grant funding that is needed, or maybe investments from or support or subsidies for early R&D from the government. So what do you think should be provided as opportunities that could help the adaptation investments to scale up and grow bigger. And maybe if you could also speak to more example or give an advice to the companies, because I don't think we have much time to dwell into many more questions. So this will be the round set of questions. So if you could speak to, again, maybe some of the incentives you think that should be given by the other government or other actors, stakeholders in the adaptation space. And if you could maybe give an advice to the companies. We will have companies presenting their technologies shortly. What would be your advice as to what they should do to be able to come to you and for example, seek that funding for the technologies? So Helen, I'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, so I think for a lot of the investments that we look at, we do try to look for a clear commercial case as well as scalability in the business model. And because this is such a nascent space, and sometimes it's really hard to get these two parameters. So I think in terms of startups that are maybe doing projects that are high in capex, capital expenditure, it would be good if they can leverage some lower cost financing, especially if it's developmental finance. I think that if they have find that it is something that is hard to protect, maybe for the IP side, but they may might want to think about how do you innovate on the product side, and then that kind of maybe technology risk can be better be taken care of through grants. And then I think also depending on the target customer base, like it's selling to farmers, it would be good if we can leverage some also government financing to help to loan to these farmers, because we find that the farmers cannot afford the high interest rates that are charged by other financial institutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Kishlaya?
So, Julia, I think one important thing is for these technologies is that viability gap funding. And I think we mentioned about some international funding, government funding. The way to go about, I think, is that you identified certain technologies in a country or a regional context and identify these adaptation technologies make sense and support a group of these technologies by providing, say, some sort of viability gap funding or something. The point is, you have to support these companies to a scale where there is unit economics making sense. A technology which is good, very contextual, having impact, but until unit economics of business is making sense. So some hand-holding until that unit economics of making sense is important. And the second important point from an all stakeholder perspective is that we have to, when we talk about adaptation, we have to get to the concept of total cost of ownership, means the total cost of technology per se, because while it may be an upfront cost for a technology, and some examples which Helen and Vikram talked about are purely in a rural setting where people are very conscious because of the value chain, the farming value chain. They already have high input costs. They don't want to add any further input cost. And that is when we talked about what is this technology bringing to them per se. To get the real beneficiaries onboarded is very important. And the concept of total cost of ownership has to be done. And the third thing is amplification of use cases, like what Vikram, Helen mentioned, and like Lightsmith Group and the portfolio companies will talk about. That amplification is very important because these adaptation technologies are very replicable also. So something which is working in certain part of the world with the same climatic context can work in other part of the world. So we'll have to build those use cases which are sort of amplifying the message and hence making the technology a mainstream. So these were the few thoughts, Julia, I thought I'll relay.
Thanks, Kishlaya. Also, again, very good points. And I think from the perspective of a much more larger investor and investor who perhaps is very careful as well as to the profitability and the risks and how we can scale those technologies that are somewhat more mature than the ones that are at the very, very early stages of development. Vikram, what are your thoughts on this?
Sure, thanks, Julia. I think good points made by Helen and Kish as well. To add to what they said, I think startups in the space are quite nascent in India, and I think when they start up, they need to certainly demonstrate a commercial market fit. It is necessary but not sufficient for them to impact climate and create adaptation and resilience measures across industries. But they would certainly need to demonstrate viability at a unit economics level and also have a very clear product market fit with initial commercialization. The source of performance-based grants and challenge grants that governments usually do, such as the National Adaptation Fund in India, which has been very successfully implementing such projects with NABARD in terms of mangrove restorations in India. And I think these are very early stages of capital that come largely in use during the inception and go-to-market stages of commercializing a technology that are hitherto been not utilized by startups very well in this space. And I think there is a certain perception of these funds or these adaptation and resilience grants being hard to access. If there are certain measures that the government and the stakeholders, be it local or national, can create to access these early stages of capital, these are non-dilutive, cheaper sources of capital that can certainly validate the initial technology risk that most investors see and the initial product market risks that most investors see, right? And I think if these challenges are addressed by these sources of cheaper or non-dilutive grant funding programs, such as the ones that I mentioned, it will make the case much more stronger for funds like us to come in and help them scale their offerings to the market. And the second point I see that companies in this space do not adequately address would be leveraging existing solutions and technologies. I think the amalgamation of their go-to-market strategy right now is at a point where most of these companies are trying to create all of this solution or technology in-house, which can be largely inefficient from a speed go-to-market perspective. And there are existing solutions that they can leverage around satellite imagery or reducing drought risk or reducing agricultural climate resilience risk. These need not be invented. They need not invent the wheelhouse completely again for them to go to market and prove their technologies, right? And the final point that I see companies need to perhaps emphasize a bit more on would be to build partnerships and networks, because regardless of the countries that you operate in, these are challenges that are closely working hand in glove with the local governments. This might be the state governments or the central governments, but it cannot be, you need a village to raise a child, essentially. And these are technologies that would need the support and adoption of both local and central governments for them to be effectively used and for them to be adopted as standards for the markets that they're operating, right? So I think these would be my points when I see companies operating in this space.
Thanks so much, Vikram. And indeed, couldn't agree with you more on the need to have a village to raise a child as a mother, but that's not the subject of this matter. So yes, no, I think very, very good point. And indeed, we have to probably make it clear as well to those companies that are listening or those participants that are interested into, how they can move up and try to have investors in their technologies. And I think the points you're making around the fact there is cheap capital available, one just need to actively look for it. And, once they have that can help them to build up and perhaps then scale up and make their investments more viable and more accessible to broad markets. And of course, the necessity for networks and connections and having, the conversations with the local stakeholders and with the national government and all the other sources of funding that is available there to be able to access it and have the information on what is out there. It's indeed very, very critical. So thanks so much, Vikram, and thank you to the panelists. I do wish to open it up for any questions, any immediate questions we may have from the audience. I think we can spend 10 minutes or so for that before we move on to the next very exciting panel on the actual adaptation technological solutions. So maybe if any of the speakers, if the participants would like to ask questions directly, you may raise your hands and we will unmute you. Or if you do not wish to say, you may still list your questions in the chat box and then we will pass it on to the panelists to answer. So any immediate reactions, questions, opinions, we would be very keen to hear from you. Yes, I see one hand. Maybe if the moderator could unmute them. Massimiliano.
An impeccable pronunciation. You can call me Masi for short. I am with the Catalyst Fund. We are a pre-seed VC and accelerator that invests across emerging markets. Most of our portfolio is actually in Africa. And when we really started off, our investment thesis was centered around not just the need for financial capital, but also the need for human capital. So 50% of what we provide is actually in the form of venture building support. And the question that I would like to ask the panelists is actually related to this investment thesis. I think we've been speaking a lot about the need for capital, financial capital that is, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what role does sort of embedded venture building support in form of embedded human capital that a VC or some other supporting organization would provide these startups? What role does that play? And how do you see that fitting into the overall thesis, whether from the perspective of AIIB or AC Ventures or any of the other funds that are present? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Iliana. So I'll ask the panelists to speak in the order that they were presenting: Helen, Kishlaya, and Vikram.
Yeah, sure. Yes, we do believe human capital is extremely important, especially in this part of the world where I think the whole venture capital market is still not as developed as developed markets. So really, we try to spend a lot of time with the founders. We organize monthly events, webinars. We also work with industry experts such as Google, AWS, to bring them the latest technology developments, and also to help them to grow their company in different aspects. As you know, we're going through a funding winter right now, and so a lot of companies have to cut costs and survive the winter. So I think that is a very important part. And I think human capital is also extends to like what the portfolio companies do for their target user base. So I mean, for our companies, one thing we are quite focused on is also how they, for example, companies that are helping farmers to input to transfer knowledge about best farming practices, also to like fishermen, how to best increase their yield while still protecting the environment. So I think that those are areas of human capital that we are very focused on.
Thanks, Masi, for this very important pointer. What we sometimes overrate the dollars than the people. So thanks for bringing the human angle in the discussion. I think no matter how good a technology, how good a business model is, until you're comfortable with the people and the founder and the team, we generally don't proceed. So the role of venture builder, which you mentioned, is helping these people and supporting them institutionalization, because as an institutional investor, our role is to institutionalize. So when we go about these opportunities and partners with VC funds, we try to institutionalize various ENS aspects, climate aspect, governance aspects. So the real value add from our side generally is the institutionalization of things, so that this is not a one-off thing. It becomes more like a mature platform which can be scaled. So thanks for this very important pointer.
So thanks, Masi. That was a great question. I think if I were to address your point specifically on human capital and the role of venture builders in this ecosystem, I think it's a very fair point in the sense that you do see a lot of early stage funds with renewed interest in climate, but we don't see too much focus on what the entrepreneur's initial capabilities ought to be. And very often there are mistakes that a first-time entrepreneur, I myself having been one, does, and that could be very much precluded by venture builders and venture studios in this ecosystem. And from that perspective, I think we do currently have a dearth of very, very early stage venture builders and venture studios who come in with a very rigorous thought process and structure about how to go about building climate-specific companies. We have seen the incurrence of these studios and venture builders in other sectors, but I'm hopeful and optimistic that venture builders such as Catalyst and others will come up in this space. And needless to say, that acts as a very good source of potential companies for us as well as we evaluate their go-to-market and scaling strategies. So I'm optimistic and hopeful I'll see a few more of that in that space.
Thanks so much, Vikram. I think with optimism and hope, which we are all keen to also experience more from the different investors and different companies, I will, unless there are any other questions, burning questions, I am also very keen to move into the next panel discussion and really hear some of the stories and examples of the very interesting companies that that are present today. So with that, I'll pass it on to the moderator, Jay, for our second panel discussion. And please bear with us for another very exciting hour.
Thank you very much, Julia. It's great to be here. And thank you again to AIIB for being such a wonderful partner to the Global Adaptation and Resilience Investment Working Group, or GARI, as well as to the Lightsmith Group. Welcome everyone that's just joined us. I know that we had a little bit of technical challenges. I think that Kishlaya's point about when you mention technology sometimes performs and sometimes doesn't perform. So to the point about human capital being out there, we certainly need more entrepreneurs to focus on technology reliability, particularly in this area. We are really excited now after hearing the prioritization of technologies for infrastructure that can build resilience and adaptation to climate change to really kind of turn from the investor focus that Helen at AC and that Law Capital and others have really brought to the discussion at Vikram and others, as well as at AIIB, to turn to some of the entrepreneurs who actually have these technologies that are operating out there that build resilience to climate change and adaptation, that are technologies really for infrastructure, which is a critical challenge area. So what I'll do is go through each of the panelists in turn. I think we've had a little bit of technical challenges with at least one of our panelists, unfortunately, joining us. But we'll start here with a couple of questions, just basically about the technology that's out there right now that's being implemented to support adaptation and climate resilience in infrastructure, and then move on to the implications for different parts of adaptation. We'll start with Smita Singhal, the CEO of Absolute Water, who I think is here. Yes, good to see you.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, whatever
wonderful.
time it is, wherever you guys are.
Smita, I'll let you give an introduction to yourself and briefly to describe your company's technology and solution and really how it impacts and helps support the customers that you have in the context of climate change itself. Over to you, Smita.
So, I'm just going to share a really quick presentation on, on our technology. But yeah, hi, I'm Smita Singhal and I am the director of Absolute Water. We're headquartered in New Delhi, India. And we are an innovative green wastewater recovery technology where we convert sewage to potable water without the use of any chemicals. So I'm just going to give a really quick presentation. Yeah. So basically, as I said, we started in 2016. We're a nature-based, a completely nature-based system where we customize based on two specific models, which is the civil-based and the modular-based, so that we have no space constraints whatsoever to build this technology where we are constructing or reusing sewage to make it into potable levels. We use a mix of vermifiltration, so it's a mix of worms, which are a specific kind of earthworms that we use, that are their entire sustenance is completely based on the bacteria and the pathogens that come in from sewage. Then we use a mix of organic and inorganic media, which are wood chips, gravel stones, and sand. And then we go through the final form of filtration, which is up to bathing quality water, which is called ozonation, which is a natural form of disinfection. Then if anybody wants it further treated for drinking water, then we use a particular kind of membrane, which also does not require any kind of chemical dosing. The biggest USP of this is that we do not create any sludge. We're the only green technology compared to also other conventional technologies that does not create any sludge. It's non-RO based, so therefore it is 100% conversion of sewage to treated water. And we have we are one of the only green technologies right now that has the maximum amount of usage for treated water, for everything from groundwater recharging to water body re-enhancements, and all the way and everything else in between, up to bathing and drinking. So toilet flushing, construction, agriculture, irrigation, we are able to meet all those parameters. As well as the our entire thing, our basis is planet, profit, and people. So when I talk about planet, we're talking about positive health and growth of flora, fauna, and aquaculture, improve groundwater quality, and we've been able to decrease the extraction of groundwater by 70%. And because of the groundwater being recharged, there's improved soil quality in terms of agriculture and irrigation. For profit, we are one of the quickest ROIs when we install the plant. It's a sale of, as well as from sale of treated water from multiple uses, as I had mentioned, as well as a sale of replenished organic media, which we do once in 16 months, which becomes a very high-grade fertilizer and soil conditioner. When we talk about people, this is the best part. We don't need any prior skill or education, for anybody to operate the plant. It is that simple to use. It is designed completely based on gravity, and it literally has a start and stop button. And the sale which comes out of replenished organic media can be something that people can actually use as a financial validation for an ownership, which helps for making that happen. We're also very excited about our new mobile treatment plant, which again has never been done before. This is a completely green system, same technology, but we've just put it on wheels, which helps us to make this into a plug-and-play unit where you literally get treated water in 45 minutes flat. It's quick response, and it's ready and able to use. It is used for disaster relief as well as for construction and community consumption. And when we're talking about construction, this is why we had invented this entire thing, is because it can help in extraction, in depleting the extraction of groundwater for the use of construction, and can literally go from site to site and become a rental mode of investment. So this is where Absolute Water is at, and we have 27 plants in India across 7 states, and we're looking to pilot in Southeast Asia very soon. So that's where Absolute Water is at right now.
Thank you so much, Smita. I also wanted to mention that Absolute Water and Smita's entire team are alumni of the Adaptation SME Accelerator Project, which has been supported by the Global Environment Facility and the Inter-American Development Bank, as well as Conservation International. We're really excited to be partnered with Village Ventures and others in this particular area, where we're focused on companies that have great technologies in developing countries to support adaptation and resilience to climate change. Speaking of that topic, we'll turn now to Riddhish Soni, the CEO of OMSAT, which is a leading radar satellite application for water resource management and other applications across multiple countries. He has a terrific background in the space industry, both on the international and local side of things, and is also an alumni of the Adaptation SME Accelerator Project. So over to you, Riddhish.
Yeah. Namaste, everyone. Greetings from India. Imagine you had been given the responsibility of setting up a civilization on the moon, say by Elon Musk himself. What would be the most essential element you would look for sustaining life? Yes, you are absolutely right. It is water. Water on the moon was an interesting discovery. After Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, there were several missions that were sent to the moon to discover traces of water. Unfortunately, there was no success. Coincidentally, water on the moon was first discovered by the Chandrayaan-1 lunar mission of India in the year 2009. And using the same motivation behind the technology that was used to discover water on the moon, we shall see how the same technology can be used to detect the smallest droplet of water present underneath your feet. Isn't this something wonderful? Isn't this something unique? Welcome to the Internet of Groundwater. Welcome to OMSAT. Did you know 2 out of 5 Indians don't get access to clean potable drinking water? This water crisis triggers a massive food shortage. This massive food shortage triggers a migrational crisis. So far as every year, 50,000 farmers in a region called as Marathwada, that is a province in the state of Maharashtra, triggers a rural to urban migration. So that's a big crisis daily. So Here we come into place. OMSAT provides groundwater hydroanalytics to farmer producer organizations at $80 per hectare. Using advanced earth imaging techniques, we monitor the changes and fluctuations in the groundwater table, which are a proxy to the amount of overexploitation in groundwater resources that has taken place. This ensures judicious usage of groundwater by the smallholder farmers. We are different because unlike traditional costly and time-consuming survey-based methods, we are able to provide all our services with high precision and 75% reduced cost, logistically and economically. The groundwater market globally is a $6.7 billion market. And since India is the largest exploiter of groundwater resources globally, our beachhead market is India, which is around $920 million for the groundwater monitoring market itself. We have a wide spectrum of products covering the entire value chain of the groundwater product life cycle. This involves groundwater conservation, monitoring groundwater exploitation, groundwater exploration, and solar pump site suitability, thereby providing a comprehensive solution for the energy-water nexus. We believe in expanding our impact by making strong partnerships with national and international organizations like the World Food Program, the Japanese Space Agency. Until date, we have worked with 6 countries globally, impacted farmers, farmer producer organization, and irrigation departments. These are a list of international and national awards globally and nationally and internationally. So come join us in making the groundwater infrastructure of India resilient and sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ridish, for talking about the groundwater focus of technologies that can be applied here, particularly as you're seeing increasing scarcity driven by the effects of climate change. Water, as we've heard, is a critical area where climate change impact is affecting infrastructure owners, societies across Asia and other different regions. One of the leading companies that's also involved in looking at water types of issues is Astera. We're very happy that Eli Peretz from Israel is joining us as the CEO. He's a leading entrepreneur in this area. We'd love to have him describe Astera's technology solution here, and it helps people right now in developed and developing countries look at issues around water that are being affected by climate change in today's landscape. Over to you, Eli.
Thank you, Jay. Happy to be part of this event. Okay, I'll be sharing my presentation. We'll start with a quick video, which I hope it will come through. Otherwise, I will just go directly to the presentation.
What started as a search for water on Mars, on Earth became Astera. Experts in underground soil moisture and leak detection, we are now saving the world billions of gallons of drinking water annually. And that's just a glimpse of the potential of our technology and our vision for the future, to be better citizens of a more sustainable world. To make that possible, Astera has grown beyond leak detection to provide infrastructure data across industries. Soil moisture for road, rail, and mining, and for earthen dams and levees. Pipe condition assessment for water and wastewater. Ground conditions for infrastructure planning. Unprecedented infrastructure intelligence, driving more informed decisions to build the future we envision. A safe, clean, efficient, and sustainable planet for all. Astera, the intelligence to act.
Okay, so the previous speaker, Ridish, I think it was interesting. He started with the moon. Our technology started by looking for water on Mars. So we end up in turning this technology back to Earth and helping infrastructure owners to better maintain their infrastructure, looking mainly on water utilities, high linear infrastructure like roads, highways, and mining. We are involved in or managed to bring value in number 6, 9, and 13 in the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. And basically what we are doing, we are looking on several applications. On the top left, you can see an example of a situation in Bangkok where we were handling a problem that is called non-revenue water. About 30–40% of the water disappeared back to earth, back to the ground through leaks. We can identify those leaks from space using satellites. So this is one example. You can see that in Bangkok, we found more than 2,000 leaks already over the years of service that they are working with us. It translates into a very large number of greenhouse reduction. Water, about 20–30% of the water bill goes to energy. Another application that we are working on is what is usually named landslides or potholes. You can see on the right side a disaster in the UK. A few people died there. It's usually start with drainage issues. We can identify the drainage issues before it happens. In that case, sorry. Yeah, on the bottom left, excuse me for a second, on the bottom left, you can see a clip that is a kind of a tragedy. It happened in 2019, Brumadinho, Brazil. 270 people died in that event, $13 billion in damages, and this is only the beginning. We are working with several. The phenomena is called tailing dams. When it happens, it's a disastrous event. We can identify those events weeks, months, and many times years before it happened. That specific event, we took an image from a satellite archive that was stored about 4 years ago, before the event, and we could actually see the location of where it all started. And another example, coal heap monitoring. It came out of an event that took place in 1966, 144 casualties. A school was run down by a coal heap disaster, coal heap avalanche that came over a school. Today we are monitoring multiple locations all over the Welsh government, Welsh area in the UK to prevent those things from happening. And we are helping the governments, the local authorities to identify locations of hazardous areas before it happens. The company is active since 2019, and we are already working in 64 countries, working with around about a few hundred customers, delivering services, delivering data to them over our platform. We are working in a SaaS model. Our SaaS model is called EO Discover. You can see here an example of how the dashboard looks like based on EO Discover in terms of water saving, energy saving, location found, and so on. So that's all from my side.
Thank you very much, Eli. So you can see active technologies being deployed right now to really, in the case of absolute water, have more efficient reuse of wastewater and other kinds of activities that are out there. Ridish looking at groundwater solutions and also other applications in the India context, and then Eli in multiple countries around the world, with Astera really looking at addressing water leaks and water utilities, as well as the state of different types of other sites of infrastructure surrounding dams and other locations by using advanced technology that's available right now to deal with an increasing series of climate change impacts. Now we'll turn to Christina Becker-Burke from Cadmus. We'll talk about some of the solutions that Cadmus has that are applicable right now to help companies, governments, utilities, and others in the context of increasing risk for climate change. So over to you, Christina.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks all for including me today. As Jay said, I'm Christina Becker-Burke. I'm a vice president at Cadmus, and I lead Cadmus's global climate consulting portfolio. And Cadmus is an environmental social good consulting firm. So we come at this from a professional services angle rather than having a specific technology that we're providing. And we support governments and businesses around the world with designing and implementing their climate resilience and mitigation strategies. And so our support helps create an enabling environment for investors and for governments to invest in many of the technologies and solutions that have been featured here today. And a lot of our support also helps with, as my colleague Sean Keel will highlight in a moment, helps sort of with the implementation through the deal structuring and financial support. So some of the core types of support that we provide at Cadmus can include designing a policy or a program to enable private sector investment in specific technologies. It could also be helping an organization, whether it's a government or the private sector, to create or review or improve their emergency planning protocols. So that could be developing in-house emergency preparedness or emergency response procedures, leading tabletop exercises, conducting after action reviews of what works, what could be done better to be able to improve their response, as well as identify priority areas from a resilience investment perspective as well. Depending on the client, sometimes we are also asked to help identify technologies or services and solutions that are emerging. We're finding that that's coming up increasingly as it relates to nature-based solutions and sustainable building materials as clients are trying to navigate that space and understand what the options are there, and is there a supply chain there to actually support substantial investment in that market. So that's a little bit about Cadmus, and I'll head back to you, Jay, recognizing that our Cadmus capabilities have expanded and include a lot more beyond what I've highlighted, and my colleague Sean will speak to that.
That's great. Sean, maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the applications that Cadmus has been working on, the utility sector and other sectors related to the effects of climate change, and then we'll turn to a couple of other solution providers and then do one or two more rounds of discussion before we get to Q&A. Sean?
Sounds good. Thanks, Jay. Thanks, everyone, for having us. So, yeah, I mean, the way we come at this, as I guess some of the new services that we provide from Cadmus is really around addressing the investment risks, where the lack of investment in some harder to reach areas, especially in adaptation projects, which don't always scream, clean line to plain vanilla investment, so to speak. As the prior panelists, I think maybe all of them mentioned the difficulty in accessing, say, concessionary capital, so money from donors or development finance institutions. That's where we typically play, as we come and we bring blended finance solutions, whether it's risk mitigation tools, concessionary capital, access to the capital markets for larger deals. And we work a lot with either the sovereign level, sub-sovereign, or specifically directly with utilities or other infrastructure projects, private and public sector, identifying kind of where the financial risks are, and then how to mitigate them or how to raise capital on their behalf. So, for example, we can work with an existing utility. So we worked with a water utility in Brazil, helping them kind of retrofit their water supply facilities. And we provided both financial and technical options to do that. We did an economic analysis and then identified financing opportunities for them, all the way to the more innovative space where we're working with Pacific Island nation, which I won't mention just because of the sensitivity around the Eurobond market for them. But we're identifying, say, green financing options through either green bonds or more innovative structures like debt for nature swaps, which are really compelling for especially island countries. So we could get into details if you want later, but I just wanted to kind of highlight some of the things we do in a bit of detail from the financing side.
That's great. Thanks, Sean and Christina. So you see from Smino and Absolute Water, some physical solutions around wastewater reuse in this critical area, technology and data and analytics at the satellite and Earth observation level from British over at OMSAT and Astera and with Ellie, and then connecting the dots, the capabilities in blended finance and climate resilience to engage utilities, to engage governments, to really bring these physical solutions, technological data and analytics solutions together with financing solutions to really execute these kinds of technologies. Other technologies that are really being used right now include literally looking at infrastructure and its structural integrity, other kinds of aspects of really applying advanced technologies, whether it's the Internet of Things, IoT, or AI, ML, artificial intelligence, machine learning, to really analyze the infrastructure that we've already built, the infrastructure we're going to build for the next 50 to 100 years. So we're really excited to have Craig Rice, the executive director of Screening Eagle here at Dreamland Singapore, to talk a little bit about the technology that Screening Eagle has and how it has implications for infrastructure broadly and specifically in the context of risks exacerbated by climate change. Over to you, Craig, to talk about the technology solution that Screening Eagle has.
Thank you, Jay, and hello from Singapore. So yes, we're Screening Eagle. A little bit about who we are. We're actually a Swiss group. Screening Eagle was created in 2018, a combination of two existing group companies, Prosec being one of the leaders, lead pioneering companies in non-destructive testing technology for material, particularly reinforced concrete, all the way back to 1954, with some of the referenced sensors in that market. And then secondly, Dream Lab here in Singapore, which we started in 2015, which was really to digitize our inspection technology to overcome one of the key constraints, which is really this sort of paper-based data, which is very difficult to maintain with assets which have to last decades. So we're a global company, headquartered in Zurich, an R&D in Zurich, Switzerland, and Malaga in Spain, and a global footprint with offices around the world. Now, when we talk about climate adaptation and resilience, we're really focusing on the carbon, decarbonation of the built environment. As we know, the built environment accounts for up to 40% of the global carbon emissions. I mean, the focus tends to be on operational carbon, which is the energy efficient solutions, et cetera. But as a recent McKinsey report noted, embodied carbon can be up to 50% of the total carbon through the lifetime of the asset. So when we talk about infrastructure, I mean, ultimately a lot of infrastructure is reinforced concrete, still the primary building tool here in Southeast Asia, or in Asia in general. And as we know, those in the field, I mean, people think concrete lasts forever, but it doesn't. And we have a lot of issues around the concrete deterioration and longevity. And so that's sort of where the space that we work in, and also we see in this industry where there's still sort of a fix when broken mentality. So the assets are not only being inspected poorly, they're also being maintained poorly. And I think as people read the news, it seems to be we don't go by without a month here without seeing another major infrastructure problem around the world. So our key thing is really around proper inspection, maintenance of these assets to really increase longevity, to really deal with the embodied carbon in these structures. And ultimately, from a financial perspective, it means increasing the NPV of your asset. If you're getting a longer lifespan out of your asset, you're also getting a higher NPV for that asset. So our technology, as I mentioned, I mean, we have a complete suite of tools, or non-destructive testing tools around materials. This here looking at the reinforced concrete portfolio. So fully digitized, which we've digitized this portfolio. So we're able to then get the data into a digital twin. So we go all the way from visual inspection, digitizing visual inspection, which is still a large part of the inspection space, all the way through our technologies into complex imaging technology, ultrasound, radar, eddy current, that allows you not only to evaluate the condition of the concrete, but also to look into the concrete, to map the structure, et cetera. Because again, some of the issues you have with some of the older assets of not having any drawings, et cetera. So that's essentially who we are. As I say, we really focus on the asset health, structural assessment, condition assessment, to really inspect properly, maintain properly, increase the value, increase the lifespan of the asset, which ultimately deals with the carbon aspect as well as increasing the NPV of the asset. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Craig. So you can see that there's physical applications here and inspection, the application of new technologies, really look at assets as concrete in the infrastructure space. So you've seen physical solutions in wastewater, technological satellite and advanced SAR technologies being applied to detect groundwater, to detect water leakage, the ability to kind of blend that with expertise in the consulting engineering and blended finance area, as well as the application of novel technologies to really evaluate the physical aspects of specific structures in the context of risks that are being exacerbated by the climate change context, and that themselves actually exacerbate climate change as well. Finally, we'll turn to Andy Lake, who's a regional general manager at Sensat. Sensat has technology that really enables some of the creation of digital twins and other kinds of aspects that Craig alluded to with the technology that Green Eagle has. So I'll turn it over to Andy to describe Sensat's technology and how it applies as technology for infrastructure asset owners and financiers, and to talk about how that may have potential implications in the increasing risk environment that we have from climate change. Over to you, Andy.
Thanks, Jay, and Brian's going to operate the slides there. So you can flick on to the first slide if you don't mind, Brian. So thank you, everyone. At Sensat, we're an enabling platform that both builders, designers, planners, and also operators of infrastructure use to make better decisions. In the infrastructure space, we need to be very aware of the construction side of things. The planning, building, construction has such an impact on climate change. The manufacture of steel alone is 7% of the world's CO2. Concrete just been mentioned. The wastage and the rework that you get in construction is incredible. The transportation requirements inevitably by fossil fuel is huge, and the habitat damage and potential environmental, community, social damage by building hydro or building transmission or all sorts of damage that when we build large infrastructure can happen. So our platform enables all these organizations who are planning and designing and building this infrastructure to do things faster, do things more efficient, to reduce wastage, to collapse time, therefore using less fossil fuels and things. I'm going to talk a bit about some examples as well, but also just a little bit about Sensat. We're headquartered out of the UK. We've done a couple of rounds of funding, which has now built the platform to such a point where we've got about $300 billion worth of infrastructure being managed on the platform. We will be doing a third round at some stage, which is going to fund global expansion. And I'm sure Asia is in our sights for that as well. We are a B Corp certified organization, which, if you don't know about B Corp, means we put sustainability and ESG objectives at the same level as other corporate objectives like profitability and things like that. It's a modern platform, but when I say modern, yes, it's cloud. I think most things are cloud these days, but it means you can be up and running in 2 weeks. It's very low cost, very low training, very low compute power required. So it's the sort of platform that everybody can get who's a stakeholder on the platform. It's not requiring specialist skills and high cost and things like that. Just onto the next slide, please. So when you make poor decisions around infrastructure, it does lead to extended times, as I mentioned before, rework mistakes, wastage, and inefficient operations. And often on these construction projects and around infrastructure, people can't work remotely, they can't get access to correct information, they're making mistakes, they're working on wrong information. It is really difficult to collaborate. So this platform is a visualization platform. Brian, if you don't mind popping on to the next one. It's a visualization platform that really enables everybody to come together, takes multiple data sources from any sorts of places. And examples we've heard people talk about LiDAR and things, might be satellites, might be drones, it might be aeroplane-based LiDAR, it might be the BIM models, the 3D models, it might be what's in the underground infrastructure, might be, you know, sewage or power and things like that. Things like endangered animal areas, vegetation, floodplain data, all of that sort of thing, along with project information, might be schedules, it might be cost and things like that, all come into this platform to create this visualization environment. One of the examples here, I've just got 2 or 3 sort of quotes from customers, is we're helping in Sweden a green steel manufacturing plant. It is on the northern part of Sweden, but all the design using this the Sensat platform is being done in Stockholm and London and in New York, I think. So actually you don't need to be there. They're designing this whole hydrocarbon-based steel plant remotely, and the amount of gains they're getting from an environmental perspective, and without having to have boots on the ground, without having to fly in, by being able to remotely design and build, just means things are happening so much faster. Next one, please, Brian. And another one here about sort of the benefits of being able to drive these remote decisions and act remotely, is it just, you know, creates this really clear understanding of what's happening and what's actually being built. You can actually make design decisions right off the Sensat platform, and it might be you're looking at pinch points and clashes and options and route planning and things, all can happen remotely. Thanks, Brian. This is a rail project, and the efficiency gains around time in this example is, you know, they can do something that used to take 2 years, they can now do it in 6 months. If you imagine the impact on the project and the efficiency gains and the environmental impact gains and the speed of which you can get to your ESG objectives, are just collapsed and accelerated by being able to do things so much faster. Next, please. National Grid is a big, both an investor actually and a big customer in the UK. National Grid has these very ambitious objectives that are written into law about getting to net zero by 2023. They've collapsed their connection times by 10 years, and have set themselves that objective, and using Sensat extensively to plan and build their energy rollout, their transmission plans, a lot of solar as well. And they're getting these gains by being able to communicate effectively, by being able to eliminate mistakes, by being able to just collaborate so much more effectively with multiple data feeds. And National Grid has about 16 levels of data feeds going into our platform. Next one, please. I think that might be the last one, was it? Yeah,
that's the last one.
Yeah, thank you. So that's a little bit about Sensat. Over to you, Jake.
Thanks so much, Andy. So you can see here a wide range of actual available today technologies and solutions that are being implemented by folks that are in the infrastructure space, people that could be existing or potential or future clients of people like AIIB and some of the fund managers that we talked about already. Folks that range from the digital twinning technology that Andy's just described in the Sensat case, to some of the physical inspection analysis tools that Screening Eagle and Craig have described, various remote imagery analysis to really look at water sensitive issues, whether it's groundwater or water leakage in the water utility sector. Obviously, some of the solutions in physical wastewater reusage at Absolute Water, and then obviously the expertise in bringing all this together and working with the different stakeholders that Cadmus has in various geographies, whether they're utilities or governments, islands, or large countries like Brazil in the water sector. So we'll reverse the order here quickly. I think have time for maybe one or two more rounds of questions here, and start with Andy, and just really kind of focus in on a key question regarding where you think solutions are most needed, like yours, to be deployed, whether in communities, with governments, in the private or public sector, and then how important that is becoming as you see the impact of climate change continue. I mean, seeing a lot more just potential deployment of different types of infrastructure in the US and Europe, certainly a huge amount of infrastructure to be deployed across developing countries. And so Andy, if you could comment just quickly on where you're seeing that kind of demand occur, and then if there's a concrete example of a project that you can describe very briefly before we turn to some of the other folks, just to get some real data points here about concrete projects that are on the ground. Andy?
Yeah, so I mean, the short answer is both public, private, and things. I mean, across Asia, we've got so many different scenarios in terms of adoption and technology, as well as sort of different economies in terms of wealth and things. So the two aspects I would look at is who owns the infrastructure, and then who's building the infrastructure. A lot of infrastructure is owned by governments, and therefore that's the management and operation of that infrastructure typically is public, or it could be PPP in certain cases and things, probably less so private. But if we look at where, and you know, the ongoing maintenance operation of those assets, you know, requires, you know, further and further investment in technology. I think that has been lacking in a lot of our markets here across Asia. Then the other side is the manufacture. You know, we talked about concrete being extensively used in Asia. Most of the steel being manufactured for the world is probably in Asia, and we need more investment in technology there, particularly around the adaptation side of things. I mean, the real world examples that I was using there before, the hydrocarbon steel in Sweden, you know, is a good example of, you know, using our technologies to help drive their objectives. Also the national grid one that I used. We've got a lot of use cases in energy, but also in rail and road. We've completely digitized the M25 in London, and also digitized a whole digital twin of London itself for 5G rollout. And so there's a lot of examples now of people using this kind of technology to drive their ESG output requirements.
And just to follow up, Andy, you think the kind of applications you're doing in places like the UK can easily be deployed?
Absolutely,
also in
yeah. It's designed to be easy to roll out. In fact, we give a 2-week program of rolling out, so which is important when your projects, because you spin projects up very quick. You know, they run for a certain time and end, so you can't spend a year rolling out, you know, an IT platform. You need to be up and running quickly. So
really global application of these kinds of technologies. Craig, in the same way, I mean, you guys are based in Switzerland, multiple applications in different places. Just quickly, are you seeing more demand in the private sector, in the public sector, in both? I mean, infrastructure is owned differently in different places, obviously, or financed differently in different places. And can you give us one concrete example that sort of displays how your technology is being used right now? And if it was in Asia or has possible applications in Asia, that would be even more illustrative for this audience. Over to you, Craig.
Yeah, I mean, as Andy mentioned, as you mentioned, it depends on who ultimately owns the asset, and that can, for infrastructure, that's primarily government. And we're talking bridges, tunnels, so that would be the customer. But also, if you're talking about buildings, I mean, you have large property developers, et cetera. So it's both private and public in terms of who we're dealing with. I mean, our technology is used through the entire building cycle, but typically, you know, it's post-construction. So then you're dealing really in the long-term inspection and maintenance of the structure. So I can give one example of how it's used, for example, in Japan. I mean, one of our other group companies were also involved in heavy civil construction, bridges. We have post-tensioning technology and stay cables. And I think Japan has more than, 700,000 bridges. And one of the issues around post-tensioning is basically you can have problems with corrosion of the post-tensioning ducts if they're not grouted properly. Typically, you have to put the cables inside a tube and then you fill it with cement. And if it's not fully, if there's voids in it, then you get corrosion on the cables, and it's very difficult to detect that easily. So what we're able to do, a combination of our ultrasound technology and our radar technology, you're number one, easily able to detect the conduit with radar. And then using ultrasound, you can then find the voids within the duct, so you can then check the cables and fill those voids. So that's an example of taking something that was extremely difficult to do, and now doing it, actively being used in Japan with the authorities in Japan as well as contractors who can now easily inspect those post-tensioning duct cables, which are critical for the bridges, because if, as we saw basically in Italy, the Genoa case, I mean, that was a case where corroding cables caused the bridge to come down. So they can have quite devastating effects if those things aren't detected early. So ultimately, yes, that's a government situation, the asset owner, but can also be buildings as well. We also see issues around buildings. I think in New York recently, parking structures coming down through corrosion. But the technology is out there and it's being used in Asia by both public and private sector.
That's great. And just because those applications currently are in many cases in developed countries doesn't mean that they also don't have the same kind of technological potential to be applied in developing countries. We deploy more infrastructure in those areas as well.
You know, we're based in Singapore. It's being used in Indonesia. It's being used all throughout Southeast Asia, our technology. It's not only a first world sort of technology.
That's great. So global solutions to an increasingly global problem. You hear that in the digital twinning area from Sensat, as Andy's talked about, and then in the Screening Eagle context as well, really looking at the physical structures and a range of different applications, whether it's kind of forensic ex post analysis or kind of ongoing maintenance, and even potentially kind of go forward design, as Andy's talked about in that context as well. Maybe we'll turn to Cadmus and just talk about one specific example of where you're working with either public or private counterparties in this area. And then if you have a particular project, I think, Sean, you had alluded a little bit to a Brazilian water utility, but if there's something else that either you or Christina want to highlight, I'll give you guys the jump ball here, and one of you can kind of talk quickly about whether it's public or private sector that's really, or both, I think, as we've heard multiple times now from Andy and Craig, that are the counterparties here, and then an example of how your capabilities and expertise are being applied. Over to you guys.
I mean, I can expand on the Brazil example real quick, and then Christina, if you want to jump in on anything. You know, so this is I'd say a public-private initiative. There's actually a US TDA funded project that with the way the US Trade and Development Agency works is they provide a grant to local government, and so it's really local government driven. In this case, the water utility in Brazil, Compesa, and what they wanted to do is, you know, analyze both technically and economically the feasibility of retrofitting their facilities. So essentially their piping and internal infrastructure to make it more energy efficient, as well as improve their processing. And so it was a twofold kind of endeavor where not only were we looking at an energy efficiency solution to even generate more energy for the facility itself, but also to find, you know, I guess, greater economies of scale on the financing front. But in doing so, you needed to finance the retrofit. So while we were doing the economic analysis internally to see if it was a viable endeavor for the utility, we also needed to identify viable sources of financing for them, which is really like a public-private partnership initiative. And so that type of work where we step in and do it, we really kind of run the gamut from technical feasibility and implementation, as well as economic and financial feasibility and ultimately transactional support. And so those types of examples, I'd say the demand is only increasing in every country we operate around the world in essentially every developing country context where our clients work. And we're seeing everything from utilities to urban intelligent transport system work. And because there's an increased focus from the donor community in supporting adaptation initiatives, we're seeing a lot more funding flow into that. So there's a good opportunity for private sector to get that type of concessionary capital and mitigate risk and scale up these programs. So that's where we plug in to help and advise the private sector in kind of identifying where those sources are and what sorts of risk mitigation opportunities can be brought to the table so you can scale up your financing. Christina, I don't know if you wanted to build on that.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I agree. We're seeing high demand from both the private sector and the public sector. And Jay, I think in your initial question, you also asked about communities. The communities and the public sector are also naturally very intertwined. And I think communities are demanding it and pushing for it. And the pace varies a little bit by community in many regards. And I think bringing in the government perspective, governments have to have two angles. They have the angle of their role in serving the communities and their constituents and creating an enabling environment so that businesses and households can actually invest in climate resilient technologies, and thinking through like how to design a program that will make the public feel more comfortable in investing in technologies when the business case isn't that clear, or the paybacks. It's not clear because the payback is longer, or the technology isn't as proven or as widestream, or a range of other types of sort of general awareness challenges as well. So that's where we're seeing sort of a lot of demand also on the change management side of policymaking, combined with the design of like, how do you sort of reduce sort of heat risk in a given community, or flood risk or preparedness in that way. I think an interesting angle, beyond the policy side and supporting government stakeholders, is also on the government procurement side. Governments own, operate, and procure the bulk of the very large infrastructure in a given jurisdiction. And for them to approve resilient-based technologies, those technologies typically need to be on an approved procurement list. And government procurement officials, and this is especially the case, I'd say at a subnational level, like they are busy. They may be one person responsible for procuring a million things over the course of a year, and they have their list and they're going to work off of their list. And so getting technologies so they can be approved on a list, and so that, that payback in the case is made for, a slightly longer payback period, or a way in which you're able to communicate with procurement officials on how the risk profiles are changing, and other ways to look at what they consider in making their decisions, I think is a key area of need. I think we're starting to see some shift in terms of that as being of interest. We have a client that we're working with right now, and a part of what we're supporting them in their strategic planning is like, how can they access procurement officials, and what does that landscape look like? Because it's not well known for a lot of technology and solutions providers.
I think that's a great point. I mean, so what we're seeing here is, again, like different technologies that might be applied within the regions where they come from, whether it's the UK or Switzerland or Israel or India, or even the US or other places, but that really have global potential applications. And the question is who the asset owners are out there, who the stakeholders are, and then sort of connecting the dots and taking the use case, right? The actual return on investment from one geography and proving it out, to Christina's point, like really kind of demonstrating that what works in one area can work in another, and really helping to solve what are now increasingly global challenges as we see sort of the impact of climate change affect the environmental operating conditions for everyone. So thank you to Sean and to Christina for talking a little bit about some of the examples that they have. Working backwards here, we'll turn to Ellie here out of Israel. I know it's a little bit early in the morning as well, so thank you for joining us again. And just tell me, like, when you're looking at counterparties out there, is most of the demand that you're seeing on the public sector, the private sector? And is there one example, like one concrete thing that we can take away from this discussion about how your technology is being used by maybe one or more of those stakeholders really address concrete problems today that could be replicated in Asia or in other parts of the world? Ellie?
Yeah, well, I'll actually start from the last point that Christina made, which is absolutely correct. The technology is only one part of the equation. And to your point, Jay, the idea of working in the public or private sector, at least for Astera, it doesn't really make a big difference. The majority is public sector, but even if we're looking on the private sector, because it's heavily regulated, it's almost the same. They still need to go through the whole process. So as I said, Christina is correct. One side is the technology, on the other side is the bureaucracy, the public processes, issuing the tenders and so on. So I can have the best technology in the world, but if I don't have access to that processes, to that procedures, it's simply not going to happen. And I think that where the success will come from is where technology companies like us would work with engineering firms and consulting firms and public sector firms that know how to approach those budgets and those big projects. That's where things can work. Luckily, and go back to your point, if I'll take one of the use cases that is the most useful on our side is the non-revenue water. We are working with water utilities all over the US, Asia, Europe, the UK, Italy, on an issue that is called non-revenue water. It's a staggering story. 20, 30, 40% of the water that is being pumped, pushed, and delivered to the distribution network disappear back to the ground because of aging infrastructure, and the problem is only growing. The rate of fixing the infrastructure is much lower than the aging process. Having said that, it took us years and years to get recognized, for example, by AWWA, which is the American Water Works Association, as a legitimate technology. And at that point, it was booming. Once we were approved by the AWWA, we could approach all the water utilities in the US without the discussion of show me that it works. Let's do a POC. Let's do a pilot. That's the inhibitor of technology going into the public sector. I want to remind everybody, Jay, you know it from more than anyone else. We are funded, technology is being funded by VCs. The lifespan of these VCs between 2 years to 5 years, maybe 7 years. We cannot wait for a pilot to end after 5 years. It doesn't work. It's two different lines. And when the public sector is behaving on a life cycle of 10 years to, let us say, forever, technology cannot meet the need of the aging infrastructure that is just collapsing all over us.
So I think it's a great point, Ellie, and I think unfortunately, a pilot that lasts forever is not really a pilot. It's just a science project, right? And so I think the challenge that we're seeing now is some of the impacts here that we're talking about are now going to become accelerated, right? So it's not just that there are now more resources being mobilized. I mean, the US, for example, $550 billion infrastructure program that was approved back in 2021 is just beginning to be deployed at the federal level, and then $369 billion for green infrastructure approved this past year. I mean, these things are just beginning to be deployed, and that's more money for US infrastructure than has been deployed since Eisenhower built the interstate highway system back in the 1950s. So this will be an enormous push. There's a similar push going on in Europe. And I think if you heard the initial discussion by AIB senior management here, this is the push that's happening all over Asia. It has to happen. It's a linchpin for sustainable development, for pulling people out of poverty and giving them much better futures. And that has to happen, unfortunately, at the same time as we have made everything vastly more complicated, and increasingly so because of climate change, right? So we need more water infrastructure, and we need that in increasingly water scarce areas. we need better wastewater reusage, and we need that in an area where there's much more complexity around how that wastewater is going to be delivered, how it's going to be stored, what the containment conditions are going to be like, et cetera, et cetera. And then we need to find new sources of groundwater, as Ridish has talked about, and really deal with the old infrastructure that we built and new infrastructure that we're developing, whether it's using Screening Eagles technology to look at old infrastructure, or Andy's technology over at Sensat to design new infrastructure. And all that, to Ellie's point, we need to kind of make sure that the stakeholders, like the senior management here at AIB, or the fund managers you heard on the previous panel, or anyone listening to this particular webinar, are aware that these technologies are out there today. They have a real return on investment that other clients are currently actually realizing. And there's plenty of new technologies being developed at the same time. We're going to absolutely need those as well. But this is a suite of technologies that could be put on a checklist and ordered up, connected the dots by people like Cadmus and other folks, for example, proving out the investment case, because there's resonant examples of this that exist right now. So quickly, let's turn to some of the other folks on the earlier stage side of it. Ridish at OMSAT, I mean, is it public or private clients that you're seeing have the most potential demand for this? And is there one concrete example? And then to Ellie's point, we'll come back to a speed around here as we get closer to the end of time here, and ask about the two questions, which is how important is this, and how important do people realize that it is, and the gap between those things that is the thing that we need to bridge in this conversation. But Ridish, over to you. Like, where are you seeing the most need and demand right now? And is there one specific example of how OMSAT's technology is really being used by public or private stakeholders, or both, which I think is we've heard here. There are different structures in different places, and technology can be used by lots of different people, which is a great globally, which is a great feature of it. So over to you, Ridish.
So as like the previous presenters mentioned, when you talk about governments, the sales cycle is pretty longer. But when you deal with the B2B clients or B2C clients, the sales cycles are much faster. Water in India is a state matter subject, mostly controlled by the governments, but the end users are large groups of stakeholders, basically domestic agriculture or household applications. When you talk about farming in India, 89% of India's agriculture is dependent on groundwater. So people may be talking about precision agriculture, drones and everything, etc. in farming culture, but the fundamental science is without water, there is no agriculture. So every drop per crop counts. So the case study what I would like to share with is the study that we had initiated in the Banda district of Uttar Pradesh, where so this is the Banda district of Uttar Pradesh, that is 44,000 square hectares of this land, and the role that had been given to us was to detect a kind of make a technology that can detect all the available groundwater resources in the entire district and provide this data to the legislations so that uncontrolled usage of groundwater water can be controlled. So this is the European radar Sentinel, which is giving us the surfacial water bodies, and the depth of penetration of the radar is pretty lower. And the L-band, the Japanese radar that we use, was able to detect the paleo channels, a buried river which could not be identified with the naked eyes or the earlier used radar. So discovering the entire groundwater resources along with the water availability within that paleo channel was the biggest discovery that we have done till date. And the results were public. We had publication in the Everything About Water journal, which was correlated with ground-based radars, aeroplane-based, UAV-based radars, and the most conventionally used the resistivity-based radar. So this is the paleo channel that was detected, and farmers, a few of the stakeholders that we experimented and deep strategic borewells were able to be the beneficiaries of the technologies. So satellite-based radar integrated with UAV-based radar, ground-based radar, and the resistivity survey was something that we were able to implement and showcase the entire how an entire district can be scanned within 1 month period, saving time logistically and economically for the stakeholders.
It's really an interesting example. We've done a similar thing and then overlaid an AI algorithm over it to predict where leakages will be. And actually we did a pilot test, and it was 95% accurate. The AI prediction of a leakage, sure enough, that's where leakage and water wastage is such a incredible problem.
Yeah, and then I think, Ridish, as you're saying, I mean, the counterparty might be the public. The counterparty, the kind of like nominal counterparty might be the local government, but the beneficiaries are also the communities, right? They're private farmers that own very small plots. The dependency, you said 89% of Indian agriculture is dependent on groundwater, so we'll get around to other sources, and that's going to be increasingly water stressed, as we're seeing in other parts of the world as well. And so, the counterparties are going to be multiple, but public and private, some mix of both. And then again, to Ellie and Christina's point, it's really a question of proving out that business case to the counterparty stakeholder, but also then the beneficiaries that are going to receive the impact of that technology in multiple geographies. So it's great to hear about UMSAT's success. They're really proud to have them as part of the ASAP program that we've been working with here at Lightsmith on behalf of the Jeff and CI and the Nordic Development Fund. And turning again back all the way to the top of our deck here. So Smita, thank you for being patient. Would love to hear kind of how your thoughts are on whether it's public or private sector counterparties that you're seeing have the most demand for your type of technology at Absolute. And then, one example perhaps, and then we'll start with you again, going the other direction before we sort of wrap up with the last round of questions. But why don't we start there and really want to understand how you're seeing the concrete demand here. Which part of the client set are you actually seeing using your technology right now?
So, I mean, you know what, sewage is, I think, the biggest resource, right? And I think we have more of that than water that is fit for use. So, I don't think we have any third world and first world problems anymore. It's become like a global problem. So, I literally tell people that in the sense, wherever there is sewage or wherever there is polluted water, we're there to treat that. So that's, a global thing. But yeah, sure. I will take examples here in India where we have installed the plants. We have seen definitely a far more, and we got a lot of traction because of public. And it is basically purely through, say, municipal departments, through water storage boards, through wastewater and drinking water, central government authorities, state government authorities. And it was used for everything from irrigation to agriculture to groundwater recharging, as well as for treatment of polluted drains and polluted water bodies. I think right now, as far as India is concerned, I think the concern is more about recharging groundwater and to make it fit for use, because there is a lot of the population, predominantly rural, that is very, very dependent on groundwater. So even in the urban space, it is about not extracting groundwater. So we're kind of meeting both demands, where we're reusing sewage to provide water for use immediately, and in the rural space, it is more about recharging groundwater so that they are dependent, that their dependency on it is, remains the same, and they're comfortable with doing that rather than giving water from the outside sources. And as far as private is concerned, the private area, we're talking about more construction companies, where we have initiated work with them, where we're treating sewage to bring down to construction parameters so that they are not extracting groundwater for use. For construction, because they're one of the biggest, I think, appliers for groundwater usage. So it is now quickly becoming a policy here in India, where several states have banned the use of groundwater for construction. So this is where we come into play. Also for various industry, we're talking about organic industry, or we're talking about food, dairy, textile, sugar, where we have piloted and also installed plants for zero liquid discharge, where we're giving water up to potable use or drinking water, where they're reusing it for their industrial processes. So that has become a big traction for us as well. And more importantly, for residential use. So if you're talking about residential spaces where they want to treat sewage, where they can use it for toilet flushing or for irrigation, again, they're saving about 60% on their water bills. So these are the various places where we have been able. So I think it's a kind of a 50-50, and it really depends on what you really want to use the water for at the end of the day. So that's where, Absolute Water has been trying to not just experiment and pilot, but we have shown traction and proved the technology 25 times over now in these various spaces. So yeah.
That's great to hear. I think, Smita's kind of description here really illustrates one of the themes that's, I think, come out of every one of the companies that we've talked to here on this panel, which is technology is not static, right? It's finding applications in multiple places, whether it's Stera starts in, lost revenue, zero revenue water, and then moves into looking at the soil moisture issues around dams and other kinds of physical structures, whether it's screening eagles, forensic analysis of building collapse issues, moving into ongoing operations and maintenance, and intelligent baked in design and monitoring capabilities. Andy's technology over at Sensat in the development and digital twinning for large scale projects, moving into potentially operations and maintenance on a longer term basis. I know there's different discussions about that kind of application. Ridish's and I guess Astera's technology coming from the Mars and the moon to the Earth, I think, is a great example of how this is actually happening. But the potential for application of different types of imagery in the AI/ML approach to look at the various usages and issues around groundwater, and then to Smita's point, like how the application of absolute waters technology can affect a whole range of different end use cases, right, in the public and private sector. And then absolutely at the very end of it, the expertise to put all that together with the stakeholders, with the right blended finance solutions, with the right counterparties, and speaking the right languages almost at places like Cadmus, where you have this expertise on a global basis to kind of deliver these solutions to stakeholders in a way that they can actually understand them, and also then to enable that access to the business case to kind of prove it all out. We have a limited amount of time left, and everyone's been very patient, certainly on this panel, which is very large. So I appreciate everyone's thoughtfulness and attentiveness to time. And we have a number of folks that have been online from various parts of the world. It is getting quite late here in the United States as well. So thank you to those folks from different geographies. I know Astera's gotten up quite early in the morning, Ellie, to be with us today. So we'll do one last quick fire round, as I call it. I want 3 different things from each of the panelists, and we'll start with Smina and go backwards again. And they are the following. On a scale of 1 to 10, how aware are your current customers or clients, or the folks that actually need your technology, of the importance of technologies like yours to infrastructure owners and users and beneficiaries in the context of climate change, in the context of climate resilience and adaptation? So how aware are they on a scale of 1 to 10? And on a scale of 1 to 10, how aware should they be? How important really is it right now? So that we can kind of assess the gap, and we'll do this non-scientifically with this sample set. And then the third point, and very quickly, I think I'll give everyone about a minute and a half to answer this. So please give 2 numbers and 1 or 2 words. What's the most important call to action that you could give the AIIB or its network of stakeholders, whether it's investors, entrepreneurs, technologists, financiers, young people that are tuning in to think about the future here, whether it's in infrastructure itself or in blended finance or in climate or in technology? What is the one call to action that you think you would want to make at this point, given your perspective as different technologists and entrepreneurs in this critical area? So I know that's a hard thing to do in about a minute, maybe a minute and a half. We have a little bit of time here, but we'll start with Smita. So 2 numbers, 1 to 10, how important do people understand it is? And 1 to 10, how important really is it? And then what's the one call to action? So we'll start really quickly there, and then we'll run right back through the clock here, and then we'll have a little bit of summing up at the end. Smina, over to you.
Great. So basically, I think on a scale of 1 to 10, as far as my customers are concerned, if we're talking about government, I think because smart city planning is something that has got developed in the last 2 to 3 years, and there are various departments that have been developed. So that basically to create independent and perennial sources of water, right? Because currently it is all, groundwater, it is climate, it is rain. So these have all been the various ways of how we've been dependent on water. But now we're getting into smart city planning, where we don't have to worry about water, because I think the emotional and psychological fear, that we are constantly living in, and I think that's a big factor as far as technologies are concerned, is to eradicate the idea of drought, to eradicate the idea of always having a perennial source of water, which at one time we had because all our nature systems and our river systems were always full of water, and there was no pollution compared to what we have today. So to just kind of get back to that, and to always have that sense of confidence that we're always going to have that with us, and also basically is it like one technology can kind of integrate so many other aspects and applications. I think that is what that would be my call of action, actually, to be honest, because I think it is not to just deal with one thing. And we're in such a crisis right now that we need to consider technologies that can deal with a lot more other applications, so that we can do it quicker. So yeah, I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, in terms of the importance, I think we're getting there. I think we're at a 5.5 right now. And I'm hoping by 2030, we're at like 8.5, because that's what I think the whole, SDG goals are. Every country has been given those various statistics to complete. So yeah, I'm hoping that it becomes an 8.5, the importance of what's going on.
That's great. So maybe to summarize, if I'm not misspeaking here, systemic, right? A systemic approach, something that really incorporates not just a point solution in time, but that really approaches the question from a more holistic standpoint. That's great. So I hear 5.5 going to 8.5. So that's, a very, it hasn't been subjected to American inflation rates yet. We'll see what Christina and Sean have to say about what time we get there. But turning over to Riddhish.
It's a hope. It's a hope, as I said.
It's a hope. It's
an aspirational hope.
That's great. On a scale of 1 to 10, how aware are people right now of the need for these technology solutions in the infrastructure sector in the face of climate change? And then how important really is it? And then what's your one call to action? Over to you, Riddhish.
So out of a scale, if I talk about rural India and urban India, there is a large amount of technological awareness gap that I could see. And as far as groundwater is concerned, there is a big gap in unlocking a scalable solution as far as speed and accuracy of detecting groundwater resources is concerned, as well as maintaining a balance between the groundwater exploitation versus groundwater conservation is concerned. So for me, the awareness between the stakeholders is around 4 out of 10. And where we see as a market potential and where we seek to go is integrating these new technologies, bringing down the cost, because ultimately, if you talk about the developed world versus Indian market, there is a big gap, because the developed world considers a value-based market versus India considers a cost-based market. But the kind of volume and numbers what India speaks with the largest amount of population globally, I think the opportunity is huge in India. Thank you.
Okay, so value versus cost, and I hear a 4 today and an estimate of how really important it is. Riddhish, can I force you to pick a number?
6.
6. Okay. All right, Ellie, from the Israeli perspective and the global perspective, how important do clients think it is right now applying technologies to infrastructure in the face of climate change? And how really important do you think it is? And then what's your one call to action?
So it's not one perspective. I think that as a global company, we have a global perspective, and I think that it's very similar all over the world, Asia, US, Europe, and so on. So when it comes to how aware our customers, I would say that they are aware of the need of use technology, but they have a very low awareness per the actual specific technology. In other words, our customers are the type of customers that wake up in the morning, they wear yellow jackets and boots, and they drive to handle the infrastructure. They are aware of the problems that they are facing. They have no idea what are the solutions. They have no idea that Earth observation is the solution, let alone radar, let alone L-band. So the gap between the problem and how to solve it is so huge. And if it is not for us, the industry leaders, to close the gap in their mind, it will never happen. So awareness, yes, technology is important. How to solve it? No idea. They need a lot of help. How much they should be aware of? 10, 15, 200? Everything is collapsing. What are we waiting for? It's horrible out there. And the call to action, if you allow me, I would say basically 2. The first one, thinking that you will keep doing the same thing over and over again and hope for the same result is, we all know the same thing. But the real thing is, the issue with the public sector, or like the public sector, is let's not make a decision until we have to make a decision. And it's already too late. Now it's the time to make decisions. Now it's the time to adapt technology. My number one way to look whether or not the customer is ready is to what extent the innovation group or the R&D group is a gatekeeper. Remove the gatekeepers. That's my number one call to action. Remove the gatekeepers. The decision needs to be made by the CEOs, by the CFOs, by the decision makers, not by innovation group here or an R&D team on the other side. It's too late, and it's getting horrible out there.
That's great. And maybe we come back to that in the AIB context. Maybe, you know, as a follow-up, there's a new platform, I think, without stealing too much of AIB's thunder here, where they're going to be really trying to connect the dots between existing solutions and decision makers that are asset owners or financiers of these types of assets that are out there right now, that, as to Ellie's point, are absolutely 100% aware of the problem, and not necessarily nearly aware of the solution. So if I can recap here, 15 or 100 out of 10 in terms of level of importance, maybe something like a 2 to 4 on the level of awareness on the solution side. And this kind of call to action to remove gatekeepers and really to think about executing solutions now, this kind of timing issue, in addition to this kind of look at value, not necessarily cost, that Riddhish just talked about, and this kind of systemic approach that Smita's kind of called for, which I think, you know, all of these solutions together seem to have interesting overlaps in water and other areas. Maybe we'll turn quickly to Cadmus. I'll give the floor to Christina here, maybe to kind of just quickly do a 1 to 10 on how aware the counterparties are really of the challenge and the importance of involving technology and infrastructure, as opposed to just infrastructure itself in addressing the impact of climate change, and then how important it really is in an absolute way. And one call to action that I'll give to Sean to wrap up on the Cadmus side to bring us forward, and then we'll get to Craig and to Andy, and then maybe we'll wrap up here in a little bit and we'll leave some people a little bit more of their evening or their morning or their afternoon or whatever time it is in the geography that are. So Christina, maybe a 1 to 10, and then over to Sean for the
Sure. Great. I would say that most of our clients are aware that there is, they're highly aware that there's a need for adaptation and building resilience. Along with the lines of what Ellie highlighted, what technologies exist, their awareness is very low. And I would put that at a 5 in terms of there's just low knowledge of what exists and their ability to actually be able to deploy that. And how aware they should be, a 10. We get locked into our infrastructure investments, and now is the time we're behind the 8 ball for acting as it relates to tackling our climate challenges.
That's a great summary. I think this distinction between awareness of problems versus awareness of solutions is the really critical gap that we're seeing right now. And Sean, you get like to say one tagline word and maybe a sentence or two to call to action here coming from Cadmus's perspective.
Sure, I guess on the financing side for all this and directed more towards the donors and the development finance institutions is, move faster, and not that that's easy, but really don't be afraid of concessionary capital in forms of like first loss and really trying to leverage private sector investment. You kind of need to move at the speed of the private sector and really support that private sector investment, because that's what's going to move the needle.
That's great. So following on this kind of gatekeeper point that Ellie's talking about, like there are solutions out there and people that have expertise in mobilizing from the public to the private side. If I can paraphrase Sean a little bit there, that this kind of, faster and don't be afraid to use the variety of tools in the toolkit on the finance side to bring these solutions to market. Maybe we'll turn quickly then to Craig and then Andy. I'll give you some freedom on your 1 to 10 ratings here. You go back to this awareness of problem versus solution, which I think is a great distinction to make here. And then a call to action, Craig, and then we'll turn to Andy as well. And then maybe I'll try to summarize 7 much smarter people than I's commentary on this panel, but I think it's been a fascinating, very concrete conversation about different global solutions to this challenge. So infrastructure's need for technology in the face of climate change, Craig.
Say awareness of customer. I'd be slightly optimistic around a 6. I say that, having a recent presentation from a large property asset owner through Asia, assets all over Asia, and we're starting to hear them talk about embodied carbon and the fact that they simply can't be tearing down structures after 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So, that's the first time I'm starting to hear that discussion, and having been involved in this for well over a decade. So that's encouraging to hear. Talking about adaptive reuse, talking about, maintaining the life of the structures, and that's encouraging at a 6. I would agree with some other people said, in terms of awareness of technology, I think there's a big gap there. I'd put that at a 3 or 4. I think, Jay, you mentioned the technologies there being used, but asset owners still don't really know about that. So there's a big education to do that. to get out there and educate them on that. And finally, where we need to be, I think, attend. I mean, infrastructure, as I said earlier, I mean, there's stuff falling down every year, and we simply can't rebuild everything that's out there today. The carbon impact would be devastating. So we have to find a way to maintain the assets that we have, and expand the life for the carbon impact, but also from the financial point of view, from really ultimately increasing the NPV of the asset as well.
That's great. And one call to action, Craig, if I could ask you to leave us with a word or two here.
Yeah, we need to definitely inspect and maintain our assets better, and that's simply not being done. I think I mentioned it's a fix when broken mentality, and even when it is fixed, it's a patch mentality. Patch it up, take a picture, so show the owner that you fixed it, and a year later it's falling apart again. So there's still a lot to do around inspection and proper maintenance and repair of the structures that we have in place.
Yeah, so more than a Band-Aid type solution in Expo's kind of like a real dynamic solution. That's great. Andy, last numbers, last word here before I
I'll try to be quick then.
So, all of this into one nice wrapped package for anybody that's still tuned in here. Andy, since that's
so in terms of awareness now, I've given it a 5. So I reckon the people I talk to, sort of it's about half and half people who have some awareness and things, others who are just blind at the moment. Where it should be a 10. I don't believe you can deliver infrastructure these days without adaptive type technologies to help you. Otherwise, you're just going to be so in the weeds. In terms of advice, pick a project and try it. The technologies like Sensat and others have talked about, the barriers to entry are actually really low. And if you just pick a project, you're not boiling the ocean. If you pick maybe a rail project, for example, don't necessarily try and do 500 kilometers of high-speed rail in India, and I'm quite familiar with that project, for example. Pick a tunnel or pick a bridge, improve the technology in your environment. And you'll find that the data that you need, actually a lot of it exists already, but it's in silos. They've got it and it's not being used by everyone. So we just bring it out the silo, prove it on a small project. And typically what our clients do is they'll do that 2 or 3 times, then go, hey, this is awesome. And then start talking, a bigger investment, a bigger rollout and things. Just in terms of taking technologies into Asia, absolutely it can be done. I spent 13 years living in Asia, taking construction technology to a lot of Belt and Road projects, a lot of big energy, road, rail, aviation infrastructure in India, Indonesia, all around Asia. Absolutely can be done. Not naive. There are some nuances and there are some things that you need to do, but absolutely it can be done. And as I say, the barriers to entry can be low. Just get out there and try it.
So action, really, right? Just do it. The old Nike slogan.
Pick off something small and prove it and do it.
Okay, well, great. Listen, I think this has been a terrific panel. I know that it's a little bit broader than some of the ones that we've been on, but I think the breadth of activity here demonstrates several different key themes. One is there's technology everywhere. It's global technology, and that technology is moving to meet the solutions, whether those solutions are for public stakeholders, private stakeholders, the communities that benefit, and they are global problems that are becoming increasingly complicated. The second point is that these solutions are out there. So where we've talked about in this last go around an awareness level of the problem as being, let's say 5 to higher than 5, the awareness of the solutions to the problem may be trickling down in the kind of 2 to 4 range, even though the importance of all of these solutions is anywhere from 10 to at least 100 and becoming increasingly important as we see climate change kind of unfold. So the key here is getting to the concrete solutions that we're talking about. And what's wonderful, I think, and why we're very proud to be partners at Lightsmith with AIB and with Gary at AIB is that you have a series of real entrepreneurs sitting in front of you right now, whether it's Smita at Absolute Water or Ridish at OMSAT or Ellie at Astera or Andy at Sensat or Craig at Screening Eagle, or the expertise that you see that Christina and Sean bring from the Cadmus side of things. These are all technologies that are being used, expertise that's being deployed in multiple areas right now that generates real value for real counterparties in the real market. So a solution set exists. And if there was a place, and I think AIB is working on things like this, and we're happy to support them in that partnership, where these types of practical, actual solutions could be exposed to the stakeholders, public and private, which we talked about, that could then be deployed and acted on right now. I think that that would help us really quickly close that gap between the 3 to 4 number of awareness of the solution availability to the 10 in the level of importance that we're actually seeing kind of out there. So in terms of like calls to action, what I've heard from the panel is from Smita, take a systemic approach to this. It's not just one point solution. It's got to be one that looks at the different multifaceted parts of it. British suggests looking at value, not just cost. Like these are solutions that have multiple applications and evolving applications. Ellie has given a very, I think, strong call to action to get rid of the gatekeeper here, just move forward, not to innovate or test innovation, but to make decisions, right? Really to act here and expose that capability. Sean has talked about the importance of finance as a solution and various parts of the finance toolkit, whether it's blended finance, concessional finance, a whole range of options that could be used to actually turn these technologies into implementations, into actual execution of projects, unlocking the finance needed to bring technology into actual implementation. Finally, you have kind of, mirroring discussions in Craig and Andy here on the swing factor at the end. Craig saying, look, we have to think about this as a dynamic ongoing process. It's not a one-off Band-Aid approach to how we're looking at existing infrastructure and hopefully designing the infrastructure for the future. Technologies needed to be not just stuck or staple gunned onto it, but integrated into its design as a standard. That's something I think that all the development institutions or all financiers should be thinking about going forward. And Andy's suggestion just to act, right? Like don't imagine an immediate comprehensive deployment of anything, but find specific places where you can begin to deploy the technology now. And that's where the technology is actually being used right now. So I think it'd be hard to summarize all that in one word. I'm not going to try to do it. What I would say here is you see very clear examples, which is the most exciting thing for us at Lightsmith and at AIB, of technologies, expertise, and solutions globally that are addressing problems in groundwater, in wastewater, in water losses, in the development of digital twins for the development of infrastructure, for the retrofit and inspection of infrastructure, and for the blended finance solutions and the real engagement with stakeholders at places like Cadmus to bring those solutions, those technologies to the stakeholders who really need them. So in that sense, I think I really appreciate and wanted to thank all the panelists here and the prior panelists in this conversation. Thank you very much for everyone who's joined us here. Thank you to AIB. To the Global Environment Facility and to the Inter-American Development Bank, who are supporters of the ASAP program, along with Conservation International, the Adaptation Solution SME Accelerator Program, where OMSAT and Absolute Water we're happy to have with us as graduates of that. Here at Lightsmith, we would say that climate change is a critical problem and challenge for infrastructure in this 21st century and beyond. Climate change technologies that can build resilience in the infrastructure sector is an enormous opportunity at the same time. And that's for entrepreneurs, that's for financiers, that's for asset owners, and that's for the beneficiaries of all those infrastructures that are being deployed right now and the infrastructures that we have that we need to retrofit to face the future. So thank you very, very much for joining us. I really wanted to give a great shout out to the whole team at AIB, to my colleague, Brian Parham, who does all the work at Lightsmith around these kinds of activities, and to every single one of the panelists and people that have joined us here. I think we'll wrap up at this point. Thank you so much for spending the time with us. And again, it's a solution that's out there today in many different forms. It's not just a problem that's going to get increasingly complicated. It's an opportunity for entrepreneurs, technologists, and financiers. So thank you very much again for joining us. Really appreciate it. And wherever you are in the world, good morning, good afternoon, and good night. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.